الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We are in our final lesson from this wonderful book, بذل المعون في فضل الطاعون by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah. And in this book that we have said, he has categorized the book into 5 sections. The first one, talking about what a ta'un is, what a pandemic and what a plague actually is, and how it comes about. Then there is a section in the book where he talks about the cure and some of the adhkar and some of the things that we can do to protect ourselves. And then in the third section, he looked at what's inevitable is going to happen to all of us, whether you're in a plague or not, which is death, and how you can secure for yourself, if you have witnessed a plague and a pandemic, a good end, whether you die in that plague or pandemic or even after it. As we have mentioned in our previous sessions, it could be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts you as a shaheed even if you see the plague through. And the fourth section from the book, we looked at some of the fiqh ahkam and the rulings, and that was in the previous session. And from the head of them is the ruling of us not allowing ourselves, the Sharia not allowing us to enter into a land where there is a plague, or leaving a land if we are already in it where there is a plague. And from that hikmah, there are many different ahkam that have come about, connected to the masajid, connected to salawat, connected to salatul jum'ah, connected to i'tiqaf, connected to ruqya, connected to so many different things that we have looked at before and looked at in previous sessions. Because as we have said, the hikmah behind all of this is to preserve the Sharia and to preserve human life. And then in the 5th section of the book, we are now looking at what the author is going to talk about, is what a person should do once the plague has left. And within this, he's going to talk about some of the things that we should do in order for us to have the plague leave us, so that we can have it lifted from us and so that we can see it through with success and assistance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's also going to give some historical facts that have happened from this ummah and some of the things that we can perhaps learn from them. So now we are al-Bab al-Khamis, the 5th chapter, فيما يشرع فعله في الطاعون بعد وقوعه, what a person should do once the plague has occurred. And like we've said here in this chapter, in this book, or in this section of the book, he's going to talk about different things. So he's going to have sub-headings. So he's saying al-Fasl al-Awwal, in the first one, he is saying and carrying on that previously we have looked at and covered in the previous chapter some of the rulings concerning what a person should do if he has been afflicted or he himself is found in a land or in an area where it is contagious. And previously also we have looked at some of the things that he's talked about in spirituality also. So now he's beginning this chapter by saying that there are some ahkam which are internal and some ahkam which are external. The internal ahkam connected to ikhlas, connected to tawbah, connected to remorse, connected to having a feeling of regret. And one of the things that he has said is that a person must reassess his situation and realize that there could be some kind of dhulm that he's doing to himself or dhulm that he's doing to other people that needs to be removed. And there is no plague that happens and there is no pandemic that happens except that it occurs because of some kind of dhulm that has been happening in the dunya. مِمَّا يَنْبَغِي لِكُلِّ أَحَدٍ, it is necessary for every single one of us al-mubadara ilay, that we should all hasten to, raddul mudalim, that we should return the oppression and remove the oppression and stop the oppression, والتخلص من التبعات والتوبة, and to stop anything which is causing sins to occur, and to make tawbah, and to have a sense of nadam and a sense of remorse, etc. So what he is beginning this chapter by saying is that there are some internal illnesses as well as external illnesses. And as Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is saying, and this is what he is referring to here as well, is that diseases are of two types. Diseases are internal diseases and diseases are external diseases. So a person may be afflicted by a plague or a pandemic, but that's just one type of disease. And the people of the dunya only see that one type of disease, whereas this religion is telling us that these plagues and pandemics occur because of both types of diseases that are present in our lives. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a rahmah, or perhaps as a punishment, sends them down in order for us to reflect. Then the author, rahimahullah, goes on to talk about, like we have said here, some of the things that in this chapter he's going to talk about, some of the things that we could perhaps do to remove it, and some of the things that have happened in the past in the way of people trying their best to remove these plagues and pandemics. So now, is it permissible? هل يشرع الدعاء برفعه أو لا? Is making dua allowed or not, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away the plague? And from that question, we have sub-questions that come out of it. Is it permissible for us then to congregate? Is it permissible to have nawazil in like a qunut? And the qunut and nawazil basically means is that when something afflicts the ummah, the imam of the salat will supplicate to Allah after the last ruku' of every single prayer, according to what he thinks is a necessity. So he can do it for Fajr, he can do it after Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib and Isha, he can do it just in the loud prayers and not in the quiet prayers, he can do it in all 5 prayers if he wants. And nawazil, and this is found in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, is that whenever something afflicted the ummah, the Prophet ﷺ used to supplicate to Allah in the obligatory prayers aloud after the final ruku'. And this is known with the fuqaha as qunut an-nawazil. So the author is asking here, is it permissible for us to make nawazil in our salawat? And is it permissible? Now there's another thing that is known in the books of fiqh and hadith, is salat al-Istisqa. And we don't really have that in this country so much, because we have a lot of rain. But in countries where there isn't much rain, if rainfall is delayed or it doesn't even come about for that year, then Islam legislates for them to pray Salat al-Istisqa. And Allah talks about Musa alayhi salam, وَإِذِ اسْتَسْقَى مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ. They were in a drought, they didn't have much water, so Musa made istisqa for his people. And we have Salat al-Istisqa also. And the characteristic of it, and we don't want to go too much into it because it's a separate dars, but it's similar to Salat al-Eid, and a person would go out in the morning, out of the main area, of the urban area, they'd go into the suburban area, and they would then display humility and tawbah and istighfar and increase in giving sadaqah, and they would do the salah in congregation. So now the author is asking here, can we make qiyas and an analogy from these two aspects in the sharia and apply them to plagues and pandemics? Now, in answering this question, rahimahullah, he said that there is no doubt and there is no difference of opinion in this either, that making dua in specific and in general is all legislated. And there are many ayat in the Quran and the Hadith which talk about this. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي أَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. When my servant asks you about me, then I am close. And there are many ayat. The Prophet ﷺ said, also there are many hadith from them, he said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, الدعاء هو العبادة. Dua is worship. And he also said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that whoever doesn't ask Allah, then Allah gets angry with that person. Man la yas'al yaghdab an. Whoever doesn't ask Allah, then Allah gets angry with that person. So there are many ahadith and ayat. So now the ulama agree that dua is allowed, and it is legislated, and it is recommended, and it could even be wajib in certain scenarios. And there is no difference of opinion on that. And we've looked at some perhaps misconceptions that people may have with this. Is there a confliction with us making dua for it to be lifted, whereas the Prophet ﷺ described it as being a rahmah, and it is described it as being shahada li kulli muslim, it's a form of martyrdom for every single Muslim? No, as we've seen before, and the author has pointed out, that it is a dua that we have it removed, but at the same time we have good thoughts of Allah. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't accept the dua and He wants something which is greater for us, then we ask Allah to give us shahada, and that His rahmah it covers us. So the ulama have no difference of opinion on this, is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself made dua for the fever to be lifted from Al-Madinah, and for it to be sent to Juhfa, and that the ta'un be rejected from the Haram in Al-Madinah and be sent to Sham. So there is no difference of opinion between the ulama in that. However, when it comes to the qunut, and let's talk about the qunut first before we talk about gathering and congregating and going out of the city. The qunut, again, let's remind ourselves, is done within the salat itself, and it is done in the last ruku' of the obligatory prayers, whether it's the loud prayers, the audible prayers, or the silent prayers. Now, the majority of the ulama have said no, it is not legislated for a person to do that. And the author is from the Shafi'i madhab, and he talks about the view of Imam al-Shafi'i and the Shafi'is in general. And the Shafi'is are of the view that it is legislated, and some of them even said that it becomes heavily emphasized that a person or the Imam of the Masjid makes qunut. And Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah in in one of his famous books of fiqh, an encyclopedia which is very, very extensive, he said rahimahullah, inna qunut inda nazila lam ukrih. Making qunut when there is any kind of affliction, I do not dislike it. وَإِن قَنَتَ فِي غَيْرِ نَازِلِ كَرِهْتُ. And if there is no need for a person, if there is something which is not afflicting the ummah, then I dislike it for him to do that. So there is clear statement here from Imam Shafi'i as well. وَقَالُ الطَّاعُونَ أَخَصْ مِنَ الْوَبَاءِ وَقَدْ وَقَعَ فِي زَمَنِ الْخِيَارِ الصَّحَابَةِ ثُمَّ فِي زَمَنِ الْخِيَارِ التَّابِعِينَ. So now, the author talks about Imam Shafi'i, but now he goes on to give his opinion, and this is the opinion of some of the Shafi'is themselves who disagreed with others from the Shafi'i madhab in saying, and they agreed with the majority, which is that it is not legislated for us to do qunut. And this is the opinion of Imam Ahmad in his madhab, and the later Shafi'is, as we have said before, and it is the opinion of the majority of the ulama. And the reason why they have said this is that it has not been narrated from any of the companions that they did qunut al-nawazil, even though they witnessed many ta'uns. In the time of the companions, there were at least 3 ta'uns, 3 plagues and pandemics that occurred within the 1st century after Hijrah. But it's not been narrated that any of them did this. But then he goes on to talk about it extensively between the khilaf, between the Shafi'is and the ulama, etc. And we will just summarize as to what he says. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah says that the origin of nawazil, and this is what has been argued by the Shafi'is, that the origin of the nawazil is to remove any kind of hardship from the Muslims. So we don't need a precedence from the companions in this, as long as we've got something from the Prophet ﷺ himself, and now then we can understand any kind of difficulty which afflicts the ummah, then we can make qunut for that. We can make qunut for that. And what some of the Shafi'is have also said is that if a person, and this is a bit, this can be easily argued by the other party, but they have said is that if a person abandons making the qunut, or a section from society, or the imam of the masjid, they abandon making the qunut, then it looks like, and it gives support to the idea that there is no making of dua, and that we just leave it to the qadr of Allah. And if we were to die, it's going to happen anyway, so why do we need to supplicate? And in actual fact, some of the ulama who have rejected making qunut in nawazil for the ta'un have used that as an argument that we do not need to make dua for the pandemic or the plague to be lifted, or that we are averted from it, because whatever Allah decrees is going to happen, and if we die then it is good for us, and if we don't die then it is good for us either way, so there's no need for us to supplicate. And some of the ulama have said that. So the Shafi'is have said, no, we don't agree with that, because the Prophet ﷺ, whenever something occurred in the ummah, he would make dua for the ummah. Therefore, this is something which is similar to that. But as we have also seen, and this is what the author is saying here, and this doesn't fit with the understanding with the author, and it doesn't fit in with the understanding of many of the ulama, which is that in the previous lectures, I believe in the third lecture or the fourth lecture, or in the previous lectures, we have looked at chapters of certain adhkar that a person can make from the Quran and from the authentic Sunnah that a person can do specifically for things which are causing him difficulty and generally in his life as a cure and a protection. And we also know that these pandemics and plagues can come about from a gust and a wound from the shayateen themselves. And when we can marry those two together, then we can understand that the Prophet ﷺ has taught us that we have an enemy and we need to seek protection against that enemy. And that means we need to seek protection in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, making dua is from the Sunnah, and it has been legislated in this religion. Whatever the case, this is a strong difference of opinion, as we can see. Some of them have said, no, we have a precedence from the Prophet ﷺ, and as long as we can understand the reason why the Prophet ﷺ has done it, then we can follow that example. And this is known as the ulama as a illah, with a ayn, illah. As long as we have a illah for a hukm, then we can base a qiyas and some kind of analogy based on that illah, on that reasoning. And the reasoning is found in the Sunnah, and that is sufficient, even if the companions didn't do that. Whereas the majority of ulama have said no, there is no specific evidence for it, and the companions have the best of understanding, and if they didn't do it, then we're not going to do it. And Allah knows best as to what seems to be the correct opinion. For me, what seems to be the correct opinion, this is the opinion of many of the contemporary ulama, is that there is no qunut an-nazila specifically for the plague, because the best of understanding is with the understanding of the Khulafa ar-Rashidun after the Prophet ﷺ has left us. The Prophet ﷺ told us to stick fast to his Sunnah, or Sunnah Khulafa ar-Rashidin al-Mahdi min ba'di, and the four rightly guided caliphs that came after him. Addu alayha bin nawajid, and hold on to them with your molar teeth. So now the Prophet ﷺ has given that as an example for us, and because it got dire, companions were dying, and Umar didn't suggest that we should make qunut, and they have the best of understanding of the religion. However, as you can see, there isn't anything decisive. So if the group that are leading the prayer, or the committee of the masjid, or the imam of the country, or the ruler, was to decide that we need to make qunut an-nazila, then that must be respected and followed. And this is a very important principle when it comes to differences of opinion, and this is agreed upon between the ulama of the madahib, is that the ruler can dictate for himself or make a judgment for himself as to what he thinks is the correct opinion in this particular circumstance, and then it becomes binding upon all of us then to respect it and follow it, even if we disagree with his judgment, as long as there is anything that is not contradicting clearly from the Kitab and the Sunnah. And this is a matter of Aqeedah, and it's not even a matter of fiqh, it's a matter of Aqeedah. And we've talked about this extensively in previous sessions, in previous books. We've actually covered books from Imam Shawkani and others from the ulama on this particular mas'ala. Therefore, it really is good for us to know whether there is a qunut al-nazil or not, but really the matter is determined by the Imam of the masjid or the ruler of the country. The next mas'ala that he talks about is when we're talking about dua, before we get to istisqa and us people gathering and congregating to make dua, before we get to that, as horrible as it may sound, the author is actually talking about a mas'ala that has come about, which is it permissible for people to supplicate to Allah that other people die as a consequence of the plague or pandemic? So now we've talked about, is it permissible for us to make dua for it to be lifted? Is it permissible for us to make dua in congregation during the prayer? But can we make a particular wording in our dua and say, oh Allah, ask for certain people to die and certain people to live, or oh Allah, take such and such people away? As you can see here, لا يباح الدعاء على أحد من المسلمين بالموت بغير موجب له. And then he concludes for us the opinion which he thinks is the strongest, that it is not permissible for a person to supplicate against his brother Muslim or sister and say, oh Allah, make this person die, or make such and such ruler die, or make such and such government, be affected, or make such and such countries be affected. Like we said, as horrible as it sounds, it has been discussed by the ulama, and they have concluded, or Ibn Hajar for himself, rahimahullah, has concluded that it is not permissible for us to supplicate against other Muslims so that they will die from the plague or the pandemic. And he quotes others from the ulama. Al-Karabisi, rahimahullah, he said, if someone dies, this could be punished by law. And if a person, لو دعا على غيره بالموت لم يجب عليه تعزير. If a person supplicates for another person and that person doesn't deserve that dua to be made, then he needs to be punished by law. He needs to be punished by law. There has to be some kind of consequence from the qadi and the ruler because of this act of criminality that he has done towards another Muslim. As for the Prophet ﷺ, so now there is another issue that he brings up in order for us to understand these masail, rahimahullah. As for the Prophet ﷺ asking for this ummah to perish by ta'un, and this has been an interpretation from some of the ulama, فَنَا أُمَّتِ بِالطَّعْنِ وَالطَّاعُونَ, that my ummah will perish by being injured and by the plague. Some of the ulama have understood that to be a dua from the Prophet ﷺ. So if we are to interpret it as being a dua, then the Prophet ﷺ asking for this ummah to be perished in this manner, what that means is that the Prophet ﷺ was actually supplicating for the ummah, not against the ummah. Therefore, that gives us a clarity and understanding that the Prophet ﷺ wasn't allowing for a Muslim to supplicate against another Muslim. And the dua of the Prophet ﷺ is that this ummah be given shahada and martyrdom, and that it is a rahmah upon them, and it comes about as something which is good for this Muslim ummah if they see a plague or a pandemic, and that they are not punished by it, and that they are not oppressed by the kuffar. And the author then goes on to talk about different masail, and like we've said here in this section, he talks about it in detail between the ulama of the Shafi'iyya, etc., and and some of the masail that are connected to that. But we have just answered by summarizing what he has talked about by saying, yes, it is permissible for us to supplicate. Yes, no, there is no nawazil, and he is not allowed to supplicate against another Muslim. And a good conclusion here is from Tajuddin al-Subki, one of the ulama of the Shafi'is, rahimahullah, and he said, if it is permissible to ask Allah that the Muslims are affected, then it's also permissible to ask Allah to keep the Muslims safe. If it is permissible to ask Allah that the Muslims aren't affected, then it is also permissible for us to ask Allah to keep the Muslims safe. And what that means is that this is a good conclusion to all the masail, meaning it is permissible for us to make dua, it is permissible for us to supplicate for your brother Muslim, and then it becomes haram for him to supplicate in anything bad for the Muslims and the Muslim Ummah. And in this also, as a side benefit, As-Subki and Ibn Hajar rahimahullah have put this here so that we can then understand إِذَا جَازَ الدُّعَى بِطُولِ الْأُمُرِ. In this, it is also permissible for us to supplicate to Allah that He extends our life upon goodness. That He extends our life upon goodness. And with that, then we can understand that a general understanding from the Sharia is that when we make dua, we ask Allah that He gives us long, healthy, prosperous lives based on the most important ingredient of Iman and goodness and good deeds. Because the believer sees the life of the dunya as a chance to elevate himself, and he doesn't want to hasten himself towards death. And the Prophet ﷺ also told us, "La tatamanna liqa al-adu." Do not wish to meet the army. Do not wish to meet the enemy. Do not wish to see death and run towards fitna. If you are in a state of prosperity, if you're in a state of comfortable comfort and ease, then enjoy that and use that to worship Allah. So now what we can understand is that As-Subki rahimahullah is saying what we should be doing is making dua for this Muslim ummah to have a status of stability and ease, and no fitna and no calamity affecting us. Now from this is a very important point. This is a very, very important point from Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, is that he mentions that when we ask for life, when we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, give us a good life and give us a extended life, and do not take the illness away from me perhaps, what a person must be doing is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a life which is upon goodness. For a life which is upon goodness. And this is very important because a lot of people make dua and say, oh Allah, extend such and such person's life, or Allah, give them a good life and give them a lengthy life and give them a shifa and things like that. And all of that is good. But Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is making a very important point in saying that when you ask for life and when you ask for prosperity and when you ask for death or any kind of calamity to be repelled from you, and you don't make it a condition in your dua to say, oh Allah, make it something which is repelling me of something bad so that I can be consistent on what is good, then you are actually imitating Iblis. You are actually imitating Iblis. How? Iblis supplicated to Allah, "Anzirni ila yawmi yub'athun," repel from me death until the last day, and he didn't say, repel it so that I may do good deeds. He didn't say, repel it so that I may have tawbah. He didn't say, repel it so that I may increase in doing goodness. He wanted the evil, he wanted the calamity, he wanted the punishment, he wanted death to be repelled from him so that he can stay and enjoy the life of the dunya furthermore. Therefore, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is making a very important point here, is that when you ask for prosperity, when you ask for health, and when you ask for a long life, for yourself or for other people, when you're asking for the goodness of this dunya, then you need to make sure that you are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives you goodness, meaning goodness of Iman with it. So you should be saying, "Oh Allah, extend such and such person's life upon goodness. Oh Allah, extend my life upon Iman." And not just to say, "Give me an extension," without having that stipulation within it. And now we can also understand, and not to digress too much, but we can also then understand that saying something like Jazakallah is not sufficient. When a person says Jazakallah, it's not sufficient, because that means, oh Allah, reward this person, but with what? We reward him with the dunya, reward him with what? That's why it's very important for us to say Jazakallahu khaira or Jazakallahu khair. And this is very important. There's not one shred of evidence, there's no hadith, no ayah, no narration from any of the Salaf where they said Jazakallah and that's it. It has to come with Jazakallah khair. So now Ibn Hajar is mentioning a very important point, is that whenever somebody is asking for any kind of goodness from the dunya, then it should be coupled with the fact that the person is asking for an increase of goodness, an increase of iman. But there's also another mas'ala which comes from this also, which is it then permissible for a person to make dua for death? As we have said before, it's not permissible for us to do that. But does it become permissible for a person to ask for death if there is a reason for him to do so? Meaning, if he sees this as a good opportunity, as we have seen with the companions before, Mu'adh ibn Jabal and others from the companions, they supplicated to Allah that they have a good death and that He accepts them as being shaheed during the plague and the pandemic that they saw. Is it permissible for us to ask Allah for death if there is virtue involved? If there is a fear of fitna, like Abu Ubaidah did, like Mu'adh did, radiyallahu anhuma, then the ulama are agreed that if a person fears for himself fitna, then he should supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He removes the fitna from him. But it then becomes permissible for him also to supplicate to Allah for shahada, or to supplicate to Allah that He removes from him the fitna. And we also have the narration from the Prophet ﷺ where he used to supplicate, Allahumma ahyini ma kanat hayat khayran li wa tawaffani ma kanat wafat khayran li. Oh Allah, make me alive and make me stay alive in this dunya as long as life is good for me, and take me away and make me pass away from the life of the dunya if this is good for me. So if a person is an increased level of fitna, like Maryam alayhi salam did, Ya laytani mittu qabla hadha wa kuntu nasyan mansiya, the ulama have said that she made that supplication, and the Prophet ﷺ has taught us the supplication here, is that if a person wants virtue, or if a person fears a fitna, then it becomes permissible for them then to ask, oh Allah, in general terms, not specific, not say, oh Allah, make me die, but what it means is, oh Allah, give me a blessed end and take me away from this fitna. And as we have seen from the wording of the Prophet ﷺ, وَتَوَفَّنِي مَا كَانَ وَفَاتْ خَيْرًا لِي, and make me pass away if death is good for me. So then it becomes permissible with that kind of wording for a person, oh Allah, give me shahada, as Abu Ubaidah did and then Mu'adh did in following his practice. It then becomes permissible for then a person to ask for a noble end and to be saved from fitna. Then the author talks about congregational acts of worship. And this is very important because we have seen when COVID-19 first broke out, people were calling for communal prayers to be prayed in different locations in the world at the same time. So people in the east and in the west and in the north and in the south, they would, despite their time zones, come together at one communal time when they can all pray together and ask Allah. And then we've seen things on WhatsApp and Facebook and different things, people messaging one another with different adhkar and different supplications that person should do, etc. The author is asking, is that allowed for us to congregate in that manner? And what he says, rahimahullah, is that all of this is an innovation. All of this is not allowed. And anything which is innovated into the religion is not allowed. And in actual fact, as others from the ulama have said, it is actually a major sin for a person to innovate into the religion. And if that innovation carries something which has got kufr and shirk in it, it stops being a major sin, and then it becomes an act of kufr even, and an act of shirk. Therefore, innovations are of two types, and it is very important for us to understand, because Allah knows best what kind of innovations are actually being circulated, but some of them may even have kufr and shirk inside of them. But he is now he's talking about a person supplicating to Allah, and not supplicating to somebody who's passed away, or somebody who doesn't have any right for tawassul, or any kind of barakah, etc. وَأَمَّا الْإِجْتِمَاعُ لَهُ, as for uniting to make dua, or adhkar, or salah, كَمَا فِي الْإِسْتِسْقَى, just like a person would do in istisqa, they'd go out to the desert, and they'd congregate, and they would give sadaqah, and they'd make istighfar collectively together. He said, فَبِدْعَةٌ حَدَثَتْ فِي الطَّاعُونِ الْكَبِيرِ, this has been an innovation which was introduced in the 8th century in Damascus. Therefore, for around 749 years, the Ummah has never ever seen anything like this. And he talks about what happened in Damascus. And like we said in this chapter, he's talking about the things that are needed for us to remove the plague and the pandemic, and some of the things that we should be doing after it has gone. And he'll talk about that slightly later on. But here he's also talking about things that happened in history. So now he is saying in Damascus, in year 749, they used to gather and they used to scream out adhkar and supplications to Allah. وَيَسْخَرُونَ صَرَاخًا عَالِيًا, as you can see at the top of the page here. فَصَارُوا يَدْعُونَ وَيَسْخَرُونَ صَرَاخًا عَالِيًا. They used to go and they used to supplicate and they used to shout and scream their supplication to Allah. And they used to go out and make istighatha. And we've talked about istighatha before, but the ulama said istighatha is when a person asks Allah with desperation to remove any kind of difficulty. That's istighatha. But then the author says, in actual fact, when they did that innovation, previously there were only a few number of deaths, but after that the ta'un actually got worse. وَخَرَجَ النَّاسِ إِلَى الصَّحْرَاءِ, and then they used to go out to the desert and they do their screaming and they do their innovation, and they used to make their istighath, etc. فَأَذَمَ الطَّاعُونَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ وَكَثَرَ. In actual fact, the plague got worse and more people died. وَكَانَ قَبْلَ دُعَائِهِمْ أَخَفَّ, and before they made this innovation, the people that were dying and were affected were less than that. But now, because of the innovation actually made it worse. And then the author actually says in his own time, something similar happened in Cairo, and he mentions that this happened in the year 833, so it's the 9th century, and Rabi al-Akhir, he said 40 people were dying on average every day because of the plague, which is a large number obviously for that time. And a month later, so it started in Rabi al-Akhir, so in Jumada al-Ula, they went out to the desert with their innovations, and they did something like what happened in Damascus before, similar to Istisqa. They would go out there, make dua, make istighfar, and they'd do it in congregation, etc. And in this one here, they actually made it as a community thing that they were going to fast for 3 days in a row. So everybody fast for 3 days in a row. Again, here's an innovation. And they stayed out there for a number of days in the deserts, fasting and supplicating and making istighfar and doing it communal, etc. And the Shaykh said here, not a month went by not a month went by, that from 40 a day it increased to 1,000 a day, and perhaps it increased to even more than that. So the author is actually saying to us, what is the consequence of these innovations? In actual fact, it makes it even worse. And then he says some of the ulama agreed with these innovations and these practices, and this is showing you the impartial nature of Ahl Sunnah and the ulama. But despite these being innovated, and him being of the opinion that is innovated and it's not allowed, he said despite all of that, وَأَفْتَى جَمَاعَةٌ مِنَ الْعُلَمَاءِ بِأَنَّ التَّرْكَ ذَلِكَ أَوْلَى, that some of the ulama have said that it's permissible, but if you don't do it, it's better. And some of the ulama have said, no, you should be doing it. فَأَفْتَى بَعْدَ النَّاسِ بِمَشْرُوعِيَّةِ ذَلِكَ, and some of them said that you should be doing it. So now he is quoting and he's showing you, he's not hiding, he's not ignoring the fact that some of the ulama have said that you should be doing it, but that doesn't necessarily make it the right thing to do or the correct opinion. So he said some of them rejected it, and some of them said a person should be doing it, and some of them said that they shouldn't be doing it. But then he gives a reason here, is that some of the ulama gave that opinion in saying that you should be doing it, or perhaps you shouldn't be doing it, but if you did do it, then it's okay, because of the politics at that time. And this is very important, because in order for us to understand fiqh, we also need to understand history, and we also need to understand the context. And this is the same thing in the ummah today. People are saying, what's happening to the ulama, and why are certain things happening in certain countries, etc. In order for you to understand what's happening, then you need to understand the politics, and when you understand the politics, then the fiqh will become clearer to you. Some of the ulama withheld, this is what the Ibn Hajar is saying at that time, some of the ulama withheld from holding a public opinion, but their statements remained general against the innovation, because it was a fitna at that time, and they thought that if they were to say you shouldn't do it, people would then have bad thoughts of the ulama. So they warned about it, or warned against it in a roundabout way, but they weren't being as direct. And this is something, as you can see in the ummah, even until today. What's the ruling on such and such country having a national day celebration? And you won't find many ulama coming out saying that this is an innovation, etc. That's because of the politics of the country. That's because of a fitna that it could possibly create. So the ulama need to talk about that and deal with it in a particular manner, and whilst upholding the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the same time. So it could be that they issue a fatwa, or they are not as explicit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the religion of Allah. So now Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is making that point very clear to us, that the correct opinion is that we cannot bring about salvation by innovation. And even if some of the ulama have been silent or even been supporting it, it doesn't justify it. And the reason why, as he concludes here, he says that none of this was known at the time of the Salaf. There is not one single narration that they used to do communal acts of worship, and they used to make analogies and acts of worship and create a new act of worship, etc. There is not one single narration. In actual fact, there is one narration which he will mention in the next page. But he is making a general observation here, is that none of the Salaf really did it. And it's not mentioned in the books of the fiqh. It's not mentioned in the books of Abu Hanifa or Malik, Shafi or Ahmad. It's not mentioned in the books of fiqh that this is what a person should do in response to a ta'un. Therefore, every single affair must be responded with its correct method. And this is what he is saying here, rahimahullah. We need to go back to ittiba'. And this is the actual wording that he mentions. We need to go back to ittiba'. What's ittiba'? Ittiba' means following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and following the Sunnah, and understanding what the Sunnah is about. So we need to go back to ittiba'. I'm just looking for the wording here. There we are. والمعتمد في ذلك الاتباع وَلَا مَدْخَلْ الْقِيَاسِ فِي ذَلِكَ. We need to go back to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and we can't create analogies and new acts of worship based on those analogies. And this is a very important principle, because the ulama agreed that you cannot make qiyas in acts of worship. Because in that scenario, you would have some people saying we pray 10 times a day because that's better than 5. Or we'll pray 6 rak'at for Salatul Asr because that's better than 4. There are no acts of qiyas when it comes to legislating worship. And he then goes on to say, and this is actually one of the reasons why he wrote this book, Rahimahullah. He actually says this here, that he saw so many innovations in his time in 9th century of this ummah, that he saw it as an obligation upon himself to gather everything that he could that has been stated from the narrations from the Prophet ﷺ, from the ayat, from the narrations from the Salaf, and the statements of the ulama about plagues and pandemics. And that's how this book came about. So he mentions that, rahimahullah, here midway, that the reason why he wrote this book is because there are so many innovations. وَهَذَا مِنْ أَسْبَابِ الْحَامِلَ لِي عَلَى تَبْيِيرِ هَذَا الْكِتَابِ. And these are some of the reasons why it became upon me that I wanted to make a compilation of a book like this. بعد أن كنت جمعت منه أكثر الأحاديث وبعد الكلام عليها. Then I gathered all these hadith, and I gathered, the explanation of these hadith, and this happened in year 819 وثمانمائة 19 وثمانمائة 819 after Hijrah. And with that, after he was doing his compilation, the king at that time asked for him to go out. So he went out with them, in the excursions where they used to have the innovations. But after he had, looked into the matter in further detail, etc., when the king asked to go out for a second time, and this shows us in the time of Ibn Hajar, there was more than one COVID. And for us, we've been rattled, and it's just once in our lifetime. And we ask Allah that He doesn't afflict us with what we cannot handle. But for him, it wasn't just once. He lost family members, and it caused him to do some kind of a research and write a book. And for the second time, he excused himself from going out. Then he said, rahimahullah, the king that told him to go out with him saw a dream. And in the dream, he was commanded to tell the imams of the masjid and the muadhins and the scholars, wal mudarrisin wal qussas, and the people who advise and what do you call it, heart softeners. They used to give heart softeners. They used to tell stories, the storytellers, and the ulama. So that's a very important point. We'll talk about this in a separate clip, which is that there's a big difference between the people who teach and the people who remind. There's a big difference between the people who teach and the people who remind. And there's a difference between an alim and a talib al-ilm and what used to be known at the time of the Salaf as a person who used to tell stories and a person who used to remind. They're not the same. And those types of lectures are not the same. And those types of approaches are not the same. So now here, the king has seen in his dream that he needs to tell the khutbah and the ulama of the imams of the masjid and the muadhins and the mudarrisin and the qussas and the people who tell the stories to go around telling people to make dua together and to finish their dua by saying رَبَّنَا اكْشِفْ عَنَّا الْعَذَابِ إِنَّا مُؤْمِنُونَ, an ayah from Surah Dukhan. And what this ayah basically means, oh Allah, take us away, or oh our Lord, take us away and remove from us this punishment, we believe. So he asked me, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah saying, he asked me about this dream. And Ibn Hajar rahimahullah said, it would be better if we had individual dua. You as the king, should tell the people to have individual dua. and remind the people to say رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا وَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا وَتَرْحَمْنَا لَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. And change the ayah to the ayah of Adam alayhi salam when he came down, or Adam and Hawa when they both came down from Jannah. Now let's just pause here for a second. This actually shows us the method of correcting the ruler if you disagree with his ijtihad. And we said previously that we need to obey the ijtihad and respect it even if you don't agree with it. But if you disagree with it, you don't start spreading rumors, and you don't start revolting, and you don't start making ghibah of your brother, even though he is, a politician. You approach him if you can, or you approach the people who can approach him if you can, and if you can't, you make dua for him. Therefore, he used hikmah in making his inkar. He used hikmah in rejecting the ijtihad and the opinion of the ruler. And he changed the ayah. And then he explained why. Because the only way that you can get the rahmah of Allah and have the plague and the pandemic removed is to change your situation. And the only way you can change your situation is to make istighfar and tawbah, and not innovated acts of worship. So he said what we need to do is make individual dua. Point number 1. Point number 2, the ayah that you have seen in your dream is concerning the kuffar. This is what they will see when they see the punishment. رَبَّنَا اكْشِفْ عَنَّا الْعَذَابَ إِنَّا مُؤْمِنُونَ. We now believe, our Lord, remove for us the punishment, or avert from us the punishment. But the ayah that he chose, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا, is the ayah of a believer who made tawbah. And the rest of the ayats that come from both of those ayahs, so the rest of Surah Dukhan and the rest of Surah Al-A'raf, actually shows us the context as to what happens next. So in Surah Dukhan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then goes on to talk about Fir'aun and the punishment of Fir'aun, وَكَمْ تَرَكُوا مِنْ جَنَّاتٍ وَعُيُونٍ, and what happened. They left the dunya and they left all their luxuries and nothing happened. وَمَا بَقَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضُ, and the heavens and the earth did not weep for them, etc. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the punishment that they will get. They will have boiling punishment, and they will have, they'll be eating from the zakum, etc. And for Adam alayhi salam, in the context of ayat that come after رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts their tawbah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes for them their affairs. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is using his hikmah here, and we have benefited from that. But then he also mentions, and like we've said before, he did say that there were no instances from the Salaf for them to innovate and to gather in that manner. In actual fact, there is one incident, and this happened in the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah, an Umayyad caliph. There was an earthquake that happened in his time, and it was very, very severe, so he gathered the people for the salat. And according to other narrations, لما وقت زلزال في زمانه, it could be interpreted that there were many earthquakes. And then what he did is that he gathered people for salat and dua, and he commanded them to give in sadaqah. And in his address to the people, he said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. And he told the people to say رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا, etc. Allah will make those people successful for those people who purify themselves and give in zakat, meaning sadaqah. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. They remember the name of their Lord and they pray salat. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah said that this is what is said from the Salaf. This is the only thing that has come from the Salaf, in that they congregated after earthquakes. Now, there isn't actually proof in this incident of Umar bin Abdul Aziz to say that a person could then congregate for plagues and pandemics, for two reasons. Number one, Umar bin Abdul Aziz himself, despite his high status, he is not evidence himself. So if he is doing a practice which is not being founded in the Quran or Sunnah or from the ulama, from the companions, then that will not necessarily be accepted. That's point number one. Because legislation can only come about from the Kitab and the Sunnah and the understanding of the companions in which they agreed upon, or any other aspect or any generation from this ummah agreed upon, based on an ijma' or consensus which is mustanad, which goes back to the Kitab and the Sunnah, which has textual basis. Therefore, legislation doesn't come about by one alim doing something, despite his high status, despite his closeness to the generation of the Prophet ﷺ. That's point number one. But even if we were to say, for argument's sake, well, how can you say that about Umar bin Abdul Aziz? He is a caliph and he is the fifth rightly guided caliph, as some of the ulama have given him the nickname of, even though others from the ulama have disputed that. Then how can you reject that? Then we will say to you, as a response to that, is that the majority of the ulama have said that it is actually recommended to pray and to hasten to salah if there is a natural disaster. And they make qiyas with eclipses, that the Prophet ﷺ saw an eclipse and he hastened to pray. And he said, ﷺ, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْآيَةَ, if you see an ayah of Allah, meaning a natural disaster, فَاسْجُدُوا, then make sujood to Allah, meaning pray. And this is also the statement of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma and Abu Hurairah himself. And this is the understanding that they had from this hadith, is that when they saw earthquakes and natural disasters, they hastened to pray salat. But the ulama have said that it is legislated for us to pray if there is a natural disaster. There is no dispute on that. But is it allowed for us to congregate and pray like we would do in the eclipse prayer? And the majority of the ulama have said yes, congregation is allowed, because it is allowed in eclipse, and it's allowed when it comes to an earthquake. However, the only khilaf is on this issue is that the Shafi'is have said that it has to be done individually, whereas the majority of ulama have said that it is done in congregation. Therefore, going back to the incident of Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahimahullah, him doing it is more in the line of him doing it because it is a natural disaster, not because of it being a plague. And there is a difference, as we have seen, as to what Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is saying. That the plague doesn't come about necessarily because of a natural disaster. It could be because of a punishment from Allah. It could be because of an attack from the jinn. It could be because of something else. Therefore, a plague is not defined as being a natural disaster in that sense. After Umar bin Abdul Aziz did this in the 49th year after Hijrah. Now, what we are learning now here is that even if we were to say, yes, well, I'm going to still go ahead and do it, despite the fact that Ibn Hajar is not saying it, Umar bin Abdul Aziz did it, that is sufficient. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah then says, in actual fact, after Umar bin Abdul Aziz did it in 49 years after Hijrah, it actually increased them in more hardship. And his own Sheikh Shihab ad-Din ibn Abi Hujla in Cairo in year 764 after Hijrah said that they gathered to make dua, they went out and they had a supplication, etc., following the same example of what happened at the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, and they actually made a dhikr. Now this dhikr here, as you can probably see on the top of your screen here, is they started making takbir and they started saying A'udhu billahi min at-ta'ni wa ta'un, and they started making Allahu Akbar a certain number of times, and they started sending peace and blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ a certain number of times. I've actually come across a WhatsApp message where a person was saying that we should be doing something which is similar to this if it was not exactly like this. And Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is saying here that this is wrong. How can a person innovate in this manner? How can a person supplicate to Allah to seek refuge against plagues when it is the Prophet ﷺ who supplicated for this ummah that they be given plagues. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is making a very good observation here. How can we then innovate acts of worship to say, oh Allah, take these plagues away from us, or remove us from these plagues, or etc., something which is innovated, when the Prophet ﷺ actually supplicated for this ummah that they, attain shahada, and one of the ways that they attain shahada is by having these plagues. Now, that doesn't contradict the fact that we shouldn't be making dua. Yes, we should be making dua. But we should be making dua for that what is good for us. And we should be making dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to avert it from us. The point that we're making here is that a person can't have innovated forms of worship, and he cannot have innovated forms of dua. And we have to be very careful in the wording that we are using here. We can say, oh Allah, we seek refuge in you from fitna, and we seek refuge in you from trials and tribulations that we cannot handle. But if you were to say, oh Allah, we seek refuge in you from your rahmah, for example, when the Prophet ﷺ said that ta'un is a form of rahmah, is a form of shahada, then that wording needs to be revised. This is what Ibn Hajar is saying here, rahimahullah. So that is one point, or one example of innovations that he mentions. But then there's also another mas'ala, and this is coming from the hadith of Ubay ibn Ka'b radiyallahu anh. Is sending peace and blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ without a fixed number, just increasing in that, will that remove hardship from a person? Now, many of the ulama have said yes, it will. And this seems to be a good opinion and a strong opinion. This is also the opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah and others from the ulama. And this is what he is saying here as well, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, that a person, أن من أعظم الأشياء الدافع للطاعون وغير من البلايا العظام كثرة السلام على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. One of the biggest ways that a person can avert himself from any kind of calamity, whether it's a plague or anything else which is a great calamity in his life that could have befallen upon him, is to increase in sending peace and blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there isn't any disagreement on this. The ulama, many of the ulama have mentioned that this is one of the ways that a person can avert himself from this. And the hadith of Ubay ibn Ka'b radiyallahu anh is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was approached by him, and he said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I do not mind making my whole night prayer in supplicating for you and sending peace and blessings for you. So the Prophet ﷺ said, no, don't do that. Don't make the whole night. So then he said, what about half the night? And then he said, no, don't make half the night. Sorry, it was the other way around. He started off half the night, then he increased. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, and this is the point here, إِذَنْ تُكْفَى هَمَّكْ وَيُكْفَرَ ذَنْبَكْ. If you increase in sending peace and blessings until he reached the whole night in supplicating for the Prophet ﷺ, rather than supplicating for himself, he said, if you do this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will suffice you in those things that worry you, and He will forgive you of your sins. This hadith is reported in Hakim and other places, and he himself, Ibn Hajar, as well as Hakim, have made this hadith sahih. He then revisits the idea of making qunut, and again he's talking about the difference of opinion that happened between the Shafi'is. And like we have said before, we don't want to go back into that, but like we have said before, Ibn Hajar himself also says that it is not correct for a person to do that, even though many ulama from his own madhab have said yes. Is it permissible for a person to make dua after congregational prayers? Is there a specific dua? Zarkashi says yes, and it's been narrated from some of the Salaf that they used to make dua after the obligatory prayers by saying Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-azim al-bala fi nafsi wal-ahl wal-mal wal-walad. And again here, look at the wording. They didn't say, oh Allah, we seek refuge in you from the ta'un. No, what they were saying here, they're saying we seek refuge in you, oh Allah, from the fitna and from the calamities and the tribulations, or as we find from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, oh Allah, give us health, etc. This is what a person should be supplicating for, and this is what has been mentioned by Zarkashi against some of the ulama. It's been narrated from some of the ulama from the Salaf that they used to supplicate with this after the obligatory prayers. And there is no harm in if a person does this. However, he cannot do it believing it to be the Sunnah. And we've talked about this as a principle before. It could be that some of the Salaf have a particular understanding to something, and they will adopt that for themselves, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it becomes the Sunnah. So a person could then, if he sees that as being something which is correct, then he can follow that as long as he doesn't believe that it is from the Sunnah. And inshallah, in the next session, I think what we'll do is we'll leave it here. We'll continue with the chapters and some of the things that he mentions as what we can benefit from history, and some of the reminders from what has happened in the Ummah previously in the next session. We ask Allah to give us Iman and Tawfiq, and that He protects this Ummah, and He allows us to return to our religion, the religion of Allah, with a beautiful of returning. هذا والله أعلم وصلى اللهم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.